Hi, my name's Neil, and in today's video I'm going to be talking to you about how I started out in photography and how I built up my wedding photography business. So since I started my YouTube channel just a few months ago, it's done so much better than I thought it would do. So firstly, a massive thank you to everyone who's subscribed to my channel and left such nice comments on my videos. I really do appreciate them all. But I realised up until this point that I don't think I've actually shared anything at all about my background and how I started out as a wedding photographer. And that's what I want to do today, especially because over the next few weeks I'd like to put out a couple of videos where I share my experiences and my advice to anybody who is looking to start out in wedding photography and become a wedding photographer themselves. And I feel as though to do those well, it's important that you know a bit more about my background and how I started. Since I photographed my first wedding, so much has changed in the industry. Virtually every aspect of the job has changed and evolved. So because of that, I hope it's something you're going to find useful. So without any further ado, let's crack on. So I photographed my first wedding in the summer of 2006, so that's 12 years ago now. And in that time, so much has changed. Virtually every aspect of wedding photography has changed, and obviously I've had to change with that as best I can. For example, when I first started, there was no social media as such. Facebook didn't exist, there was no Twitter, there was no Instagram. I think YouTube might have existed, but I didn't know about it at the time. Photographers did have websites, but they were primitive at best. I don't think blogs existed. I certainly didn't know what a blog was when I first started. And technology-wise, the vast majority of photographers were still shooting their weddings with film. Digital was extremely new at that stage, and even the best DSLRs only had a very small resolution. My first DSLR, for example, only had 6 megapixels, and that's what I photographed my first wedding on. Software-wise as well, like there was no photo mechanic, which I use all the time now. There was no Lightroom. Photoshop was around, so that's basically what I used at the time. I would put everything into Photoshop. It was just looking back now, and it just seems crazy that like that was how it was then. And just in general, it was just really hard to find inspiration. It wasn't easy to see the work of other photographers. I don't think workshops were really around. Any knowledge that I gained was from either just experience or through getting books out of the library. It seems like it was a dark ages now, but yeah, it was just a very different landscape in 2006, which even though you're only talking quite a small amount of time, really, I suppose, just over 10 years, it feels like an absolute age in terms of how things have changed since that day. And since that first wedding, I would estimate that I've probably photographed now in the region of maybe 350 to 400 weddings, which makes me just feel like an old man now. But I can honestly say that I absolutely, from the first wedding up until now, I still absolutely love this as a job, and I'm extremely lucky to still be able to do this. And it's something that, you know, I never take for granted. And in terms of where I'm at now, I photograph somewhere around 25 to 30 weddings a year. I won't photograph any more than 30 weddings, because as well as that, I also hold maybe 4 or 5 workshops a year too. And I find that for me and my workflow, that sort of number of weddings is just about right for me. Any more than that, and I'd feel as though like my work would start to suffer, basically, just because I'd be shooting too much and I wouldn't have enough time to be re-energizing my own batteries. So I suppose the best place to start is at the beginning. Photography for me has always been a real interest, but it's always really been a hobby more so than anything else. I really started to get interested in photography at university when I studied it as part of my art and design course. And as part of that course, I would play around with film cameras, and I developed my own images in the darkroom, and I really enjoyed that. But everything changed for me when I picked up a digital camera for the first time. There was just something about taking a picture and being able to see it immediately on the back of the screen that really, pardon the pun, clicked with me. And I just loved it from that moment. And that first digital camera was a Casio QV10, which was lent to me by a friend of my mum and dad's, Malk. Thank you very much, Malk, for lending me that. That camera was like, again, it's almost like a joke now, but at the time it was like state of the art. But it had, I believe it was a 0.07 megapixel sensor, which I think that meant you could print out the size of a postage stamp, something like that. I still loved the fact that you could take, that it was digital and that you could take a picture and just see it. Say, something really resonated inside of me when it came to that. Now, the other thing which that camera had, just as an aside, is you had the ability to rotate the lens so that you could see yourself in the screen before the advent of the selfie, if you like. And I just find it interesting that nowadays so many people want that in modern day cameras and so few cameras have it. But yeah, that very, very first digital camera, which I say going back now, this would have been 1997 or 1998, something like that. That had it. It's quite a strange thing. But on the other hand, it did have the world's tiniest sensor, so you know you can't really have it all. And it wasn't long after that I bought my own digital camera for the first time, and that was a Kodak DC-215 digital camera. And at the time, that for me was just absolutely groundbreaking. It was state of the art. That had a 1 megapixel resolution, and I just remember thinking, 1 megapixel, that's incredible. Who's ever going to need more than that? But yeah, I absolutely love that camera. It's a shame that I'm not sure where it is now, because I would love to have a go again with it. But yeah, it was absolutely brilliant. And again, it just sort of carried on my love for digital photography. But throughout all this time, photography just remained still a hobby for me. Even when I bought my first DSLR in December 2005, photography was still just a hobby. I absolutely loved that first DSLR of mine, which was a Nikon D70. It had 6 megapixels, and the quality of the files was so much better to what I had been used to out of my compact camera. They were just unbelievable. It was night and day, the difference, and I really, really got hooked on using that camera. I'd love taking it out at weekends and taking lots of landscapes and photographing the cat and things like that. It's still the one camera that I would never sell, because it really means a lot to me, that camera. And it was a few months after getting that camera that everything changed for me. At the time, I was working in an office for an engineering firm, doing a proper job, and a friend of mine who I worked with, called Shamim, was getting married, and asked if I'd be interested in photographing her wedding for her. And that was really exciting to me. I jumped at the chance. I explained to her, which was important, that I hadn't photographed a wedding before, that I don't think I'd even really been to many weddings, let alone photographed them. But she was fine with that and happy in the knowledge that I was going to absolutely do my best, which is obviously what I did. And starting out like that is how virtually all of my wedding photographer friends started as well. And I think it's really common that if you're interested in photography, you have a nice camera, at some stage someone will ask you if you want to photograph their wedding. And I think it's a very common routine. I don't think very many people in school ever think, oh, when I grow up I want to be a wedding photographer. That just doesn't happen. But people are interested in photography, and I say if you are, it feels inevitable at some stage you will be asked if you want to photograph a wedding. Then it's up to you whether you want to go down that route or not. But when I was offered that chance, I jumped at it. I was really excited by the chance. And then, by a strange quirk of fate, one of Shamim's friends was actually also getting married, and before I'd even shot Shamim's wedding, asked if I'd be interested in photographing her wedding as well. So before I knew it, I had 2 weddings booked in, even though I hadn't actually photographed anything at this stage. Had those 2 weddings, and it all started to become quite real for me, if you like. Now, I don't remember if I charged for those weddings or not. There's a good chance I don't think I did, and if I did, it would have been like extremely minimal, probably just so I could buy another lens or something like that. And that's something that I'm going to talk about in my later videos, that I don't think personally there's anything wrong in that. I'm not really of the opinion that you basically go in and charge high when you don't have the experience. I think there's nothing wrong with starting out at the bottom for little or no money to get better. As long as the couples who you're working for understand that you don't have that experience, so you know their expectations will be that much lower. I personally think it's the right thing to do, to start off at a very low level and price accordingly, rather than just trying to jump in and like pretend that you know what you're doing from the word go. Now, I am the first to admit that I am an absolutely terrible example to anyone who is looking to start out in weddings. The way that I started was just an absolutely terrible, terrible way. Although I absolutely did my absolute best on the wedding day, when I went into that wedding day, I really didn't have a clue. Especially in hindsight, looking back, it's even more obvious that I just didn't know what I was doing. Some examples for you. I had one camera, the Nikon D70, which at the time was a very, very good DSLR, so that was fine. I had 2 lenses. One was the 1870 kit lens, which you know is obviously not great, and a Sigma 7300 lens, which again, you know, now it's not a lens that I think about using for those focal lengths. But that was the least of my problems. The worst thing, or the luckiest thing, however you want to look at it, for me really was that I decided to start shooting RAW the night before that wedding. So before that, I'd only ever shot JPEG. I didn't even know what RAW even was. But I'd read in a magazine that RAW was a way of shooting which would give you better images. So I thought, yeah, it seems fair enough. I'll shoot RAW. And that was the day before the wedding. Terrible, terrible example. But luckily for me, it all worked out well. And the irony is, if I didn't shoot RAW, I don't think I would have shot a second wedding, because my files were being probably so much out in terms of where they're at exposure-wise that I probably wouldn't have been able to recover them if they were just JPEGs, especially on the old Nikon D70. But luckily for me, I did shoot in RAW and everything went well. I say, relatively speaking, I was actually quite pleased with the photographs. More importantly, so were Shamim and Matt, the bride and groom, and I went on into the second wedding with a little bit of confidence. Now, obviously, if I look back, or when I look back at those images now, they're not of any sort of standard. But I say, it's all about being relative to the skill level I was at. They were okay. And I say, more so than anything else, the bride and groom were pleased. I then photographed that second wedding with a bit more confidence. And again, that was the same outcome, that they were pleased. Then, again, without me really even consciously trying, it was a friend of my mum's who I think was getting married just a few weeks after those two weddings. And she then, because she knew that I'd photographed these two, asked if I'd want a photograph of her wedding as well. So, which I did. That was at Manchester Town Hall. That was a really nice wedding. So before I even knew it, I had like 3 weddings photographed, and that gave me a little portfolio. But more so than anything else, even though I can't stress enough, I didn't know what I was doing, I did know that I really enjoyed the job, and I enjoyed the experience of going to a wedding, taking photographs, which is what I absolutely love to do, and then delivering those photographs, and hopefully you get nice feedback, and that feedback was quite addictive. I was getting like really nice comments, and that was something that my day job wasn't really giving me, that same sort of job satisfaction. So I loved it from the word go, and I knew then, I think, that I'd love to be able to make something out of this if I could in the future. Now at this point, we're in 2006, 2007, and I think it's really important to try and stress again just how different everything was then. The landscape of wedding photography was completely different. So that was good for me in hindsight, because my skill level extremely low. Like, the images that I was producing were terrible by today's standards. But the key thing is, there wasn't anywhere near the same amount of photographers out there as there are now. There was virtually no other photographers out there that I knew of anyway. And one of the reasons that I think I was being asked if I'd be interested in photographing weddings was because there just wasn't that choice out there. It was either you spend a lot of money on a film photographer, or you take a punt on me, basically. And that was something that really, obviously, I benefited from. So yeah, that's the real thing that I want to try and get across, that if I was starting out now, and if I was producing the work that I produced at my first 2 or 3 weddings, there is no way that anyone would book me for that 4th wedding. With the competition being so sort of sparse, I was allowed to be quite rubbish for quite a long time, and that enabled me to get better, so that when everything did change and there were more photographers out there, I was at a level where I could compete with them and still get bookings. Where I think it's so much more difficult for people who are looking to start out in wedding photography now is that it feels as though you have to be very good very quick. You have to really hit the ground running, because so many people out there who are not just competent photographers, they're very, very good photographers, and they're very, very good wedding photographers early on as well. It's not like people are taking anywhere near as long to get to a decent level. I think because everything has changed now with the introduction of social media and workshops, it's easy now just to immerse yourself in wedding photography. You can get bombarded with images every single day, and that gives you inspiration, and it helps you to get better quicker. So all things considered, I would say that I was, timings-wise, very lucky. Very, very lucky. Whether I would be able to get better quicker now, I'm not sure. But I say at the time, I was allowed. I really want to stress this. I was very, very bad as a wedding photographer for quite a while. I think it was only maybe 3-4 years in that I sort of started to feel any sort of real confidence about what I was doing, and that I could handle weddings if things went against me on the day. As I say, I don't think you could really do that anymore. It does make it much, much tougher. But yeah, I was allowed to be pretty rubbish for a long time. But I say, I had the love for it, and that was the main thing. So what I then did is I put together a little website using a template system. So it's nothing impressive at all, but it allowed me to put my work out there. And I really enjoyed even that in itself. Like putting a website together was really exciting. I had those first few weddings, which I could make a little portfolio of, obviously. And once I put that website out there, that started to gain a little bit of traction, and it was somewhere that I could direct people to if they were interested. At this time, I also placed a little advert in a popular wedding directory at the time called Hitched. And that advert did really well for me. I think I got 3 or 4 bookings from that. These days, I think directories are more or less worthless. But again, everything was very different then. So I think it was probably about 2008 that I put that advert online. And it did quite well for me. So I had the advert, I had my website, and slowly but surely, people started to get in touch, which was very strange at the time. And people who I didn't know were now interested in me photographing their weddings. And that was a big thing, because for the first year or two, I was photographing weddings for people that I knew, friends of mine or friends of friends. And then suddenly people who I'd never heard of were getting in touch. And I thought, oh, this is quite exciting. Yeah, it slowly started to grow from there. Now, the next big thing which happened for me, my journey, was in 2009 when I won an award called the SWPP Members' Choice Wedding Photographer of the Year. And that was just the best feeling ever. That award was given to me at an award ceremony in London where I got to walk up on stage, and it all just felt so exciting. Now, in reality, that award was nothing huge. It was basically voted for by photographers on a forum. But for me, it meant so much. And I really then used that award to push myself, and it gave me so much motivation to really crack on with the wedding photography and really try and make something out of it. Especially in them days as well, because there wasn't the same number of awards that there are. I mean, these days, there are so many awards, but in them days, they just weren't out there. So to win this one was massive for me, and I absolutely loved it. And I then used that award to really push myself and promote myself. And after that, the next big challenge for me was going full time. So I knew within 2 or 3 years that it was something that I would absolutely love to do permanently and make it my career. But the next stage after that was going from a position where I was charging, say, very little for my weddings to charging an amount which would allow me to look at going full time. So around the late 2008, 2009, I really started to increase my prices to a point where I could look at my income from wedding photography being on a par with my income from my 9-to-5 full-time job. And that took a little bit of time to adjust and get the bookings in, but luckily for me, they did. I think there's certainly something to be said that of a perception as well, that if you do charge a little bit more, people just assume that you are better. Now, obviously, I'm not saying that I wasn't better. Obviously, I was getting better all the time. But I remember feeling at that time that I wasn't probably worth what I was charging. But yeah, it wasn't putting people off. So that was really good for me. And then it finally got to a point in early 2010 when I had a full year worth of weddings booked in, which would have been about 30 weddings maybe, I would imagine, that I was able to resign. And I did that in April 2010. I did that just before a weekend where I had 3 weddings, because I wanted to work right up until the point where I knew that I wouldn't be able to after that, because it would have been so difficult. And it was really difficult, because one of the hardest things about going full time is that point just before you do, when basically you're working 2 full-time jobs, because I knew that I would only going to go full-time once I had a full 12 months of wedding bookings already in the diary. So I knew that at worst, even if I didn't get another booking, I still had 12 months to give it a real shot. And luckily for me, touch wood, luckily for me, it all worked out really well. But that would always be my advice to anybody who's just going to start out. Like, if you are working alongside a job, only really look at going full time when you've got the assurance of having those bookings already in place. It really does lessen the risk, especially if you've got like bills to pay, a mortgage to pay and things like that. But saying that's what I did. So I worked right up until the point where I just knew I couldn't physically do these 2 jobs anymore. And that's when I went full time. And I say, thankfully for me, and I'll always be grateful that since then it's all gone really well for me. And I've just been, I've loved it. I've been very lucky. So I hope you found that useful, a little bit about how I started out in wedding photography. The whole industry has just changed since that time, very much for the better in my opinion, mainly due to social media. That's had a huge impact on the job. The obvious thing is that it allows us to get our work out there. Again, going back to when I was starting, once you'd photographed a wedding, really, like all you could do was put your images on a website and hope that people would see them. There wasn't that immediacy that there is now. If we photograph a wedding, we put something on Facebook, you put something on Instagram or Twitter or whatever, and it's getting seen by hundreds of people like very quickly. That just wasn't the case, and I think that's a really good thing. I think it allows good wedding photographers to be seen much more easily, because say when I started, you had a website or you had like an advert in a magazine, which is obviously not going to be changing. You can't really update that. So that's been a huge difference. Social media as well, I feel, has also allowed photographers to get to know each other better, build their own networks. One of the things that I should have mentioned earlier is that when I did first go full time, one of the very first things I did after that first weekend of weddings was I got in touch with local wedding photographers to me whose work I really respected and admired, and just asked them if they'd want to go out for lunch, and we did that. And I got to build myself quite quickly a good little network of wedding photographer friends. And I want to stress the word friends because it was important to me that I didn't want to see other wedding photographers as competition. And at that time, certainly when I first started, photographers didn't seem to talk to each other very much. I think there was a general wariness about people if they wanted to meet up. Why do you want to meet up? What do you want to know? Things like that. I genuinely wanted to meet other local photographers, to become friends with them, because I think that's important from a mental health point of view more so than anything else. It's very hard. Now I've really struggled to go from an office environment where I was amongst people, for the vast majority of the day, to suddenly working from home where I was on my own. And that's something that is very hard to underestimate, just how big that change can be and how difficult that can be. So it was really important to me that I tried to compensate for that by getting to know other photographers locally, and that's been a huge thing, and I'm really pleased that I did that, because that network has carried on, and I'm lucky now to know lots of local wedding photographers who I can call friends, and a lot of them have been from around that period as well, and that really means a lot to me. Social media has really helped me do that, and it helps lots of people. With wedding photography groups, you can find out who your local photographers are very easily and get in touch with them very easily and build your own network. And that network, especially when you go full time, is really invaluable, because it can be a very lonely job otherwise. So I think it's been a massive thing, not just other wedding photographers as well, other suppliers. The more people you can get in your wedding network, if you like, the saner you'll be, and just the nicer the job becomes. The other biggest things are more obvious, obviously, and that's the quality of cameras, which has changed unbelievably since I started. To say, if you think back to my first digital camera, 1 megapixel, my first DSLR, which I shot my first few weddings on, 6 megapixels. Now, I'm using 36 megapixel DSLRs. I'm using this mirrorless camera. The technology which is in cameras now is just unbelievable compared to how it was when I first started, and that makes the job, well, much easier. I mean, we still obviously have to be very competent photographers, but it makes our job easier to know that we can shoot in darker conditions, we can raise our ISO and not have to worry about grain as anywhere near the same degree as we did, say, 10, 12 years ago. So that's been a huge thing, as well as that software. I shudder to think how I would have edited those first few weddings when all I had was Photoshop. To think now, or to try and imagine photographing a wedding, coming back with all these raw files and not having Photo Mechanic there to sort them, not having Lightroom to add my presets to and make really quick changes to. I don't know how I managed it, or how anybody managed it back in the day. So yeah, the advancement of software has been massive, and it's made our job, it's made our job easier. We can now edit photographs so much quicker, but also it's allowed us to make our photographs so much better as well, and that can only be a good thing. So I hope you found this video useful and interesting. As I say, so much has changed in those time, but I really wanted to let you all know about how I started. I'd also be really interested to know like how you started as well. So please let me know in the comments. I do find it like really interesting to find out how people started out in wedding photography, because am I right in thinking that the majority of us, it's just a question of having a camera, people realizing that you're into photography, and then you just being asked? It seems to be the case from what I know, but let me know in the comments, as I say. So just to give you the heads up as well, I will be following this video up in the next few weeks with 1 or 2 videos all about my advice to people who are looking to start out in photography. I'm going to base all that advice on my own experience. I'll probably split the videos up into 2 sections. One will be all about shooting, and the other will be all about the business side. 2 very different aspects of wedding photography, both massively, massively important, obviously. So I'll be putting those together in the next few weeks, so keep an eye out for those. So yeah, so thank you very much for watching. I hope you found this video interesting, and I will see you next time.